The Trump-Vance administration could herald a new era for the US dollar. Donald J. Trump's selection of Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to be his vice presidential nominee pairs him with a kindred spirit on trade, taxes, and tough stance on China, but it is their shared affinity for a weak dollar that could have the most sweeping implications for the United States and the global economy. In most cases, Trump likes his policies to be strong, but when it comes to the value of the dollar, he has long expressed a different view. Its strength, he has argued, has made it harder for American manufacturers to sell their products abroad to buyers that use weaker currencies. That's because their money is worth so much less than the dollars that they need to make those purchases. And as your president, he said, one would think that I would be thrilled with our very strong dollar. This is what Trump said in 2019, explaining that the US companies like Caterpillar and Boeing were struggling to compete. He says, I am not. The dollar has been the world's dominant currency since World War II, and central banks hold about 60% of their foreign exchange reserves in dollars, according to the Congressional Research Service. The United States has maintained a strong dollar policy since the 1990s, when former Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin declared that he did not view it as a threat to the ability of American business to compete abroad. The United States avoids taking measures to steer the strength of the dollar, and Treasury secretaries tend to argue that currency value should be determined by market forces. When countries such as China have acted to weaken their currencies, the U.S. has shamed them as currency manipulators. It's now clear that how Trump would go about weakening the dollar. His Treasury Department could try to sell dollars to buy foreign currency, or try to persuade the Federal Reserve to just print more dollars. A concerted shift in policy could have reverberations for international commerce of all kinds. The depreciation of the dollar, along with Mr. Trump's plan to increase tariffs on imports, could also reignite inflation at a time when price increases are finally easing. Depreciation would add to inflation, said Mark Sobel, former longtime Treasury Department official, who is now the U.S. chairman of the Official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum. He said so would tariff hikes plus a highly expansionary fiscal policy would add to demand pressures. Skeptics of a strong dollar say it is responsible for making U.S. exports too costly abroad and the expense of American workers, at the expense of workers, and seeking to devalue it aligns with the populist ethos of Trump and Vance. At a Senate hearing last year, Vance echoed Trump's concerns while questioning Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair. He said the dollar status as a reserve currency, which means it's widely held in central banks around the world and accepted for most kinds of transactions, is a subsidy for U.S. consumers but a tax on American manufacturers. Vance said, I know the strong dollar is sort of sacred cow for the Washington consensus, but when I survey the American economy and I see our mass consumption of mostly useless imports on the one hand and our hollowed out industrial base on the other, I wonder if the reserve currency status also has some downsides and not just some upsides as well, he said. Powell responded by noting that the United States benefits from its reserve currency status, which makes it possible to buy goods all over the world with dollars. He also said there was not an obvious currency to replace it. The strength of the dollar has gained global attention this year, and its value appreciated compared with other countries' currencies as a result of higher interest rates, and that can complicate matters for central banks around the world that are grappling with inflation, and by making American exports more expensive. It can widen the U.S. trade deficit, which Trump loathes. The 2024 Republican Party platform calls for keeping the dollar as the world's reserve currency, but Trump and Vance could still try to weaken it if elected this year. Robert Lighthizer, Trump's former trade advisor, who could be a candidate to be his next Treasury Secretary, has been mulling ways to devalue the dollar if the former president wins, Politico reports. Trump could try to devalue the dollar either by signaling a policy shift, appointing a new Federal Reserve chair when Powell's term ends in 2026, who is likely to cut interest rates, or by trying to use the threat of tariffs to compel other countries to act to strengthen their own currencies. Brad Setzer, a fellow in the Council on Foreign Relations who served in the Biden administration trade office, said that Trump-Vance team faces a core contradiction in its economic agenda. He noted that Trump's proposed tax cuts would probably widen the fiscal deficit and push up interest rates, supporting the dollar. At the same time, Trump's trade agenda would most likely encourage other countries to weaken their currencies relative to the dollar in response to his tariffs. Trump has called for imposing a 10% levy on all imports and a 60% duty on imports from China. If you punish other countries, hit them with tariffs, reduce the value of their exports, the effect tends to be their currencies weaken, Stetzer said. Lawrence Summers, who served as Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration, said a move to devalue the dollar could lead to stagflation when prices rise and growth slows. If a country's government does not care about the value of its money, why should anyone else, Summers said. Raising tariffs would devalue the dollar. Devaluing the dollar are self-imposing supply shocks. Despite his interest in a weaker dollar, Trump has given mixed messages on the matter. In 2017, Trump told the Wall Street Journal that the dollar is getting too strong. The next year, however, Trump told CNBC that ultimately I want to see a strong dollar, after remarks by his Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin suggesting that a weaker dollar could be good for trade led to a sharp decline in the dollar index. But this April, as the dollar surged against the yen, Trump said that the strength of the dollar was going to put American companies out of business. It sounds good to be stupid people, but it is a disaster for our manufacturers and others, Trump said on social media. And this post was originally on New York Times. It's on DNYUZ. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.